Hi, I'm Matty O'Boyle with Reeler.com, and got an awesome practice tip for you today. So this practice tip is for stringed instrument players, people who are playing, violins, cellos, fiddles, violas, mandolins, banjos, guitars, all that kind of stuff. And as you learn to play music on a stringed instrument, you run across a choice that you have to make. And I want to talk a little bit about that choice. And that choice is between playing a note on an open string or playing it on a closed string. So this practice tip, we're going to have to dip into a little bit of the physics of sound. I don't want to get too heavy into that. But we're going to have to mention it, and then what we're going to do is we're going to see the advantages and disadvantages of each of those choices, and as you learn to express yourself through the music, you'll be making your way through that choice a lot of different times when you're playing. So it's good to know a little bit about what sound is available to you on your instrument in order to express yourself. So let's go. If I play this note, the one that sounds like this, and I play this note, the one that sounds like this, right? I'm playing G, and I'm playing the first time I played it closed by putting my finger on the 5th fret of the open D string. I get that G, or I play it open right here on that open G string. And I want you to listen to the closed and the open. Okay, they sound different. Okay, but if they're the same note, how come they sound different? And the answer is actually in the physics of sound. So one of the big differences that we're talking about here is we're using two different strings. And on all the stringed instruments I mentioned, the strings have a different thickness. So the thickness of the string is one variable. The other difference between these two ways of playing the same note is that the length of the string is going to be different. So as I put my finger down on the fretboard, I'm shortening the length of the string. So now I have two variables that are different, thickness and length of string. And when a string vibrates to produce the sound, what's going to happen is the tone that we most easily perceive is what we call the note, the G in this case. But it's not the only pitch that's actually being produced. There's a lot of other overtones being produced, and that's a like technical word from the physics of sound. So those overtones are produced at less volume, so you don't necessarily always perceive them as being present. As a matter of fact, most of those overtones, I would say that you don't perceive really as being present as individual pitches that you can discern. Sometimes you can, but for the majority of them you can't. However, they shape the sound of what you're hearing, which is also a big reason why the same note in the same octave played on the fiddle or played on the banjo and played on the guitar, one will sound like a fiddle, one will sound like a banjo, one will sound like a guitar. That has to do with the physics of the sound being produced and the overtones. So all that's kind of cool. It's not really necessary to go further into that in order to play music, but it is good to know that there are reasons why those notes sound different. Now we're going to get to the important part for musicians. The important part is, one, the open is going to keep ringing on a lot of instruments as long as that string is being activated. Now I'm playing a guitar, which is an instrument that sustains a lot. So unless I actually cut that sound off by damping the string, that sound is going to continue to ring for a while. While if I play it on the closed I can cut the sound off much more easier. So that's going to help me shape the kind of sound that I want and the kind of expression that I want when I'm playing, in this case, a melody note, but it could also be in terms of chords. That G chord and that G chord, there's other differences between those two G chords, but one of the differences is this one is going to ring out more because it has some open strings in it, while this one, well, it'll ring out the same while I have the pressure down here, but as soon as I release the pressure, I cut it off. So it's much easier to play with the closed than, it doesn't get the same effect. So those are the ringing out versus the easier to control when the sound stops is one important factor that's going to go into your choice of whether you're going to play a note or a chord open, or with open strings, as many open strings as possible, or not. The second thing that's interesting here that's going to affect your choice is how you go into the note and how you come out of the note, which is part of your musical phrasing, and musical phrasing is a lot of where the actual music is. So, if I'm going to play an open note, here's a little melodic idea. Now what I'm interested in is this G note. Now listen. Okay, did you hear the difference? Okay, what I did is, if it's a closed note, I can slide into it, and as well I can slide out of it, or I can hammer into it, or I can pull off out of it. Okay, now, for example, fiddles don't do much, they might do a lot more sliding than this kind of hammering. But depending on your instrument, you're going to want to emphasize, you're going to use one of those techniques more than another, but they're all available to you when you're using a closed note, and they're not really so available to you when you're using an open string. So how you go into the note, how you come out of the note. Is the note going to sustain, or is the note you want to cut it off, which has to do with your attack more. So all of that is really paramount to the choices that you're going to make. But there's one last factor that we need to talk about, and this is especially true when you're just beginning on an instrument, and that's the ease of playing. So obviously, if your hand that's working your fretboard doesn't have to do anything because you're playing an open string, that's going to be easier for you. I can't think of a case where it's not easier. I would say it's always easier to play an open string. At the same time, and this is important, not only is it easier to play it, but it will give you time to move your hand into its next closed string position. So the benefits of playing an open string in terms of ease are at the moment of attack on that open string, but also they carry over a little bit into your next movement, to where you're going to put your hand down again somewhere on the fretboard. So open strings are a lot easier to play, and that's something to keep in mind too. And there's nothing wrong with playing open strings when you're first learning, and then as your abilities get better, because you're working on a lot of different abilities when you're learning an instrument, as some of those become internalized, that'll give you a little bit more attention to spend on how you want to craft your sound at that kind of finer level of sound.